So it's an extremely common sort of occurrence, but this discussion is a little less relevant for competitive game, though it is a huge barrier. I would say like it's more common in real life, honestly, but it carries over into like competing and stuff. I specifically avoid touching on topics like this because why, let's say one person may have a fear of failure is different than someone else. And as a result, like there's a lot to talk about and break down there. In the sense of competitive gaming, we're going to talk about how we can address this and why it's important to kind of accept failure in these situations. Failure is a natural part of progression. I don't know why, and in fact, like, I mean, obviously I've grown up in the same culture as everyone else, where this concept of like failure, it's super demonized. But what a lot of people don't understand is like failure is a part of progression. I'm gonna give you an example. So a lot of people will think like, you know, I have to be successful at everything I ever do from the very beginning. Like, how many people have I already sniped with this? Because I've known a lot of people like this, and I used to be like this when I was like a teenager. So like I especially understand this field, especially. This sentence in itself is a trap, right? Because what is successful? What is successful? Let's define success as, like, let's say attention over how I perform in this field. So again, we're going to talk about fighting games. So some people may feel like they have to play every single fighting game and be as good as possible, and then their definition of success isn't even being successful. A definition of successful to me would be you just do well, right? Like you're learning. Like that is success to me. Some people will think success equals attention, honestly. And like, you know, that's a very blunt way to view it. It's a very direct way. But essentially, this is what it is. Like for me, I would think like, what is success to me? What do I want to be recognized for? In my case, I didn't care about like actually being successful. Successful in fighting games never mattered to me. Learning, improving, being like a strong player, that did not matter. What mattered was being recognized as a top player. And this is a very important thing to differentiate. There's a difference between wanting to be recognized as a top player and being a top player. Some people, even with this sort of mentality, can perform very well, but it is a natural kind of, it can be a deterrent, right? Because when we talk about this, right, we've already talked about how some people think. There are huge barriers. Some people may feel like they have to work really hard to do this. Some people will, you know, give up, like, essentially they'll do nothing but just game and like try to improve and be recognized in this way. Some people may feel like they just have to perform. So there's a big difference here. The first one is overcompensating, usually out of like a insecurity. The second is usually about more like, again, not really the grind, but the process of being acknowledged as good. So there's a difference here. So like, let's say usually overcompensates to accomplish something, usually undercompensates to accomplish something. This would be the I suck and I will never accomplish anything when you fail. I'm good, but X character, oh my god, I forgot that even works like that. It's so good. The X character is what stops me from being recognized as good. Commonly known as the scrub mentality. There's a reason why I'm bringing up this specific thing, and not everyone even falls into this bubble, but you can clearly tell even by the fact that I'm talking about this, and there's a lot of people who are like, you are calling me out right now. These groups, they perceive failure as a consequence of their performance. Let's say you enter a tournament. You've never entered a tournament before. You have no you have no idea how it actually works. You have no previous experience. You don't know what to expect. Essentially, you have a preset idea that you are going to essentially overperform despite this. Let's say I expect to go 2-2. As a result, 0 and 2 is extremely common. I can't even, there's like someone once like posted like statistics, like I don't know, like 33% of the tournament has to go 2 or some crazy shit like that. I was like, you know what, that's actually just a good way to think about it. It's not a matter of you being a failure when you lose. It's usually a matter of the other player just being that good. Like you only know your own history, and as a result, you may think like, well, I just suck, rather than the other person's just that good. So failure would be, I went 0-2. Anyone who's actually like like been through the tournament process would look at this and like probably be like, wow, really? You think so? Really? It's essentially like, oh, I didn't expect to do as well, right? Essentially, expectations not being met equal failure. That's essentially what a lot of people think. I want to talk about what failure really is, right? Like a lot of people just say failure equals you did something and it didn't work. That's how a lot of people tend to interpret it, right? This is essentially how a lot of people just view it, which is like, that's not even true. Like in real world environments, like if you put all your money in a business and it doesn't work and it fails, that's different, right? In competitive gaming or competitive environments, failure is a huge part of doing it. Because like essentially failure teaches you something did not work. There is no difference if you watch my stream to learn things and you did something and you failed. It's not that different. It equals essentially you are gaining knowledge. You're learning through me. You're learning through my experiences, right? Which is still through my failure. Essentially, you missed the middleman of what I'm doing. When it comes to failure, you have to recognize you learn from your mistakes, right? To me, failure is someone that does not learn from their mistakes. So a common one is like, if you want to be competitive or you are actively trying to be competitive, but you do stuff like play Anji, then get angry at top tiers in competitive environment, but refuse to change because you want to look better. You have a direct reason to change your improvements because of a self-perceived reason to stand out. Essentially, it's ego. Constantly struggles and blames top tiers because top tiers naturally beat low tiers. Does not change the situation, does not actively try to learn or adjust gameplay, just accepts I'm playing bottom tier, they're playing top tier. It's expected, right? We've talked about this before, but let me clarify something to you. I don't care if when someone complains, it doesn't matter, right? Like it really doesn't. If somebody does not change, like let's say if Luke is that much of a problem and you're just complaining about him and you don't do anything to make strategies or anything like that, your success against Luke is not going to change. So like if I'm a competitor in Street Fighter and like other top players are getting gapped by like Luke just existing, I would probably just play Luke and win because I wouldn't even need to be as good, right? I just take advantage of the fact that they have that bad mentality. You don't need to like compensate for people. A lot of people like think like oh I gotta save her. I gotta save them. Fuck no. If they're a competitive player, I leave them to rot. I'm taking advantage of that shit. Grow up, bitch. Yeah, hell yeah. If I played SF5, if I wanted to compete in SF5, I would mash on Luke. Not only would I mash on Luke, I would fucking enter every tournament. Enter every tournament. If I know anyone that does not like that character, I'm entering the same tournament as them and I'm grinding. It's just, as a competitive player, they have a weakness. I'm gonna take advantage of it. It's like if they down back and get thrown all the time, I'm gonna throw them all the time. It's no different. When you have weaknesses in your mental game, it is just the same. This is why I make a lot of content on mentality. And like a lot of people essentially will do this where they get to a certain point in their struggle. Maybe they recognize, like, let's say I failed, try to compete. I've reached the limit with my character or whatever. I'll just swap to a top tier. So like, here's another thing I commonly hear too. It's not fun if I play a top tier. It's like, well, like I want to be competitive, but it's not fun if I'm playing a top tier. That's okay. But when you're going down that road, when you select a character, just like when you do things in game, when you do something like that and choose something like that, then that is your decision, right? It's like you've locked that in. That means like this aspect of like just accepting it is extremely bad. When you play bottom tiers, you are signing up for saying, I am going to work harder. You are essentially doing the thing where you sign up for 6 years of work. You see three people get 3 years of work and you're like, that's bullshit, I want 3. That's basically what it's like. No, you signed up for 6 years. But like if you're especially like a mid-level player who's playing a weaker character and you have a goal, like a huge goal of like, I'm gonna be the best ever, and then you have that mentality of like, I'm playing bottom tier, of course I'm losing, then like you're basically you're just blocking yourself from improving. You may not be at the point where you can be competitive yet, right? You may have to come to terms with that. There may be a point where like, you know, maybe right now I'm not in the best state to be a competitive player. Maybe I need to give myself more time to learn and improve. To me, competitive players means you are actively trying to reach top 8. And by actively, I mean you are grinding, you are fucking working for it, you are like going to every offline tournament, you're entering every event. If you're just playing and you're like, oh, I'll enter a tournament every so often just for fun, that's not really that. If you're just entering things with no expectation, I wouldn't say you're really competitive. Not always, but like if you don't really have a goal or like you're not really aiming for much, it's hard to be upset if you don't reach a non-existent goal. There's another aspect of player is competitive, fears, like actively fears failure. You know, ego may get bruised. All of these can be, some of these can be connected. Like, you know, your ego can be connected to this internalized hierarchy of I should win or I should lose. Some people just care too much about what other people think, and maybe their ego is directly, you know, it's correlating to what other people think about you. Like, oh, like, you know, this person thinks I'm really good, so I can't lose, or it'll make me look like I'm really bad. You block your own improvement by dwelling too hard on either like what ifs or things you can't control. Essentially, you're fixating on things that are out of your control. That's really all that it comes down to. This is not failure. This is actually progression, right? This is actually progression, but your ego is essentially warping it into thinking like, oh, like I've fucked up. Even like in cases where you don't even know, like sometimes you don't even know you're improving, but you are just by playing. And sometimes just like being consistent with it and grinding it out, you can learn things or figure out new ideas. Just like, don't be afraid to experiment, right? People do not really talk about people like top players or strong players relating to their strengths. Like no one talks about like how we play. You're gonna have Titty Twister 940 say, I don't like Soul, so Soul players stink, and you're gonna be like, oh fuck, I wish I could have appealed to them. You're like, there's no point. There's no point. Just play the game, have fun, improve for yourself. That's why I always talk about play for yourself. When you get competitive, if you want to actually like, you know, really compete and like be like, I want to do as best as I can, like as much as I can, that's fine, right? You can enter it with any amount of character, or like any character you want. If you are directly like blocking your own improvement from, because like, oh, like matchup strategy or shit like that, then it just becomes worse, right? It becomes harder for yourself. It's important to recognize when that becomes too unhealthy, because a lot of people do that. They'll be like, oh, like I started being competitive, right? Like including like me in older times, right? Basically they start playing competitive because they're like, I just enjoy playing the game, right? Like, oh, I like playing Anji, I like learning with Anji, I'll just compete and use that to learn. Fantastic, that's great, right? If you have that mentality, you are succeeding. If you get to the point though where you're no longer talking about improving or learning, and you're just thinking, oh, I lost because lol Ram, or I lost because lol Nago, or anything like that, you're not doing it for the same reasons. A lot of the time it becomes a lot more, again, it's hierarchical, right? It's a lot more about like, I've won enough, I shouldn't lose to this person, it's just like Ram, right? That's essentially a very common mentality where you can essentially go from like a low-level player who has a great mentality to a mid-level player who has a terrible mentality just because you've had some success. I feel like a lot of new players get this mentality from seeing other more experienced players who can play in the same way. Yes, that is exactly it. Because a lot of people don't understand what the basis for strength or like what's too much work. Usually in fighting games, your success is based around how much you are willing to work. Everyone has a limit to how much they think they should work. To me, like a lot of people would say, oh, if I have to block for longer than 10 seconds, I'm out, right? Whereas I would think like, I don't mind blocking for 40 seconds because that may just be the matchup, right? Some people will think that's an absurd amount of time, but I don't, right? There's a direct limit of like blocking for 15 seconds, too much. Some things 20 seconds, too much. 10 seconds, too much, right? It varies significantly in that way. A great example is Soul. Soul, like in 1.0, like, you know, the undisputed god. You know, even when I play Soul now, casually in the tower, a lot of people don't even know the basics of how to fight Soul. Like those minor interactions. They know eat hot chip in 6p, and if 6p doesn't work, it's over. Because they just didn't try. They were just like, well, Soul's broken, so I'm not trying. And then in the next patch, it's like, oh, Soul doesn't exist anymore, so I'm just not gonna bother. Basically, there are a lot of ways that your mentality can get blocked through these sort of things, right? It's very common. A lot of people think like, oh, this is like a scrub thing, where a lot of the time how it works is like you're actually fine when you're new, but then as you improve, this starts to hit you. You just become afraid of losing or failing. But like losing or failing does not mean you're done, right? Like a lot of people essentially interpret failure as in like, oh, I lost equal people think I suck, that's it. When in actuality, what actually happens is you lost, people probably thought, wow, they lost. They probably never remember it ever again. This is hierarchy shit, right? This is what I talk about where like essentially your ego grows and gets internalized because you've had a lot of, you know, a lot of problems. Like let's say you do not see other people's experiences. You only see their outcome. You do not see all the things I've been through, right? You just see I'm streaming here, right? You don't know what I ate for breakfast today. You know your own experience. Don't downplay yourself, right? Be kind to yourself.